Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Prime News, and before we get into it, I want to remind you to enter our Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Nintendo Switch giveaway through the Gleam.io link down in the description. Now, that being said, our first story actually deals directly with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, because Masahiro Sakurai, the game's producer and primary director, has spoken in another column on Famitsu, and oh boy did he have a lot to say. First, he talks about the fact that there's going to be a day one update for the physical version only. Here's what he said. We will distribute our first update on launch day. Players who purchase the digital version don't need to worry, but players who purchase the physical version should apply this day one patch before you play. This will also prevent your replays from going off track. By the way, if you save your replays as videos, you can keep them forever, but note that they take up a lot of space. Now this is notable just because on the Wii U version of the game, every time the game released an update, it deleted all of your videos. So that's kind of nice that they have fixed that problem for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. But naturally, we have to talk a little bit about the fact there's going to be a day one update. Now it does say it is suggested that you do it before you play, not required. This is how people are still pirating and playing the leaked version, because you don't actually need a day one update to play the game. It's not a requirement. It's highly suggested. And I'm guessing part of this update is going to be where it requires you to use OS version 6.2.0, unlike the prior versions that I actually heard some people had it running as of like way back on 5.1. I've heard 5.7. Obviously 6.0, 6.1 would run just fine with it as well. Whatever the case might be, there's a day one update. I think this is just normal in the industry at this point. Now, I think what's actually more interesting to talk about is what he said next. And what he said next was about why Kirby is the only lone survivor in World of Light. We needed a solid, convincing reason for why said character could outrun Galeem. All fighters possessing normal abilities were immediately disqualified. Given that its assault enveloped the end of the galaxy, only a vehicle that could defy the laws of physics could work. Even short-distance teleportation wouldn't be enough. Some of you may have forgotten, but Kirby's Warp Star has been able to, warp since his very first game. That alone made him a pretty solid contender. The only other two fighters that could have survived would have been Bayonetta or Palutena. That being said, Bayonetta's enemies from Purgatorio, a hellish other world, were turned into spirits, so it wouldn't have made sense for her to escape. Other divine beings, like Hades, were also turned into spirits, so there was no way for Palutena could have survived too. So there you have it. Kirby survived purely because he has a Warp Star. I mean, technically, if you look into the lore of Kirby, you find out Kirby himself is like a very, very powerful character. I don't know that it'd be the most powerful character in the whole lineup, especially compared to like gods and goddesses, but it definitely is one of the most powerful characters in all of Nintendo. But it's interesting that the Warp Star is the reason he's saying went with Kirby. Not the more obvious reason that he created Kirby and he has an affinity for Kirby and he loves Kirby and he wants to put Kirby on a pedestal, which is probably deep down the real reason, but this is the game reason, obviously, to justify that Kirby is the one who survives and gets away. Riding that Warp Star off to return to the same galaxy in the future. Next up, we have sales updates from Japan for week 2 of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee's release. And needless to say, the sales actually look pretty good across the board for Switch. Let's just jump right into the numbers. So Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are still at the number 1 spot, no surprise, moving 162,467 units during its second week on the market for a grand total of 823,707 units. Now, this on its own is a 75% decrease week over week, which just happens. Launch week always has a massive decrease to the second week, but still, those are some pretty good numbers, and I think by the time Super Smash Bros. Comes out, or the week of Super Smash Bros. Coming out, Pokemon will probably cross over 1 million units just in Japan by then, at least based on the current pacing, and plus, Smash comes out, like, not this current week, but next week, so sales are going to be just flying. Now, if you are curious whether or not the evergreen titles of Switch are still selling in Japan, well, with Pokemon still moving 162,467 units, and by the way, moving over 100,000 Nintendo Switches for the week, every single evergreen Nintendo Switch title by Nintendo, published by Nintendo, even some by third parties, saw an increase in sales week over week. So Super Mario Party increased in sales by 17% and was at the number 5 spot. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was at the number 7 spot with a 26% increase. Splatoon 2 was at the number 8 spot with a 32% increase. Minecraft on Nintendo Switch, of all things, was at the number 10 spot with a 32% increase. Breath of the Wild chiming in at the 11th spot with an 11% increase. Super Mario Odyssey at the 13th spot with a 33% increase. And then, of course, Kirby Star Allies with a 35% increase. Now that's a lot of increases. Essentially every Nintendo Switch game on the list but Pokemon increased in sales. That is crazy and shows how evergreen these titles are. It shows maybe people are buying Switches for Pokemon, but they're also picking up other games along the way, and I'm not really surprised by those sales trends at all. Now, I did mention that the Nintendo Switch sold over 100,000 units. It actually sold 108,000 units for the week, moving the grand total of Nintendo Switch units in Japan to 5.7 million units, about 1.5 million away from surpassing the PlayStation 4, which it'll likely do sometime in 2019, maybe even by the midway point. So that's interesting just to see when it becomes the number one home console in Japan. It has a long ways to go to catch up to 3DS, so we'll see if it even comes close to those numbers over the next 4 to 5 years. Now, there is one more piece of news I want to talk about today, and it's just about Grid Autosport. Grid Autosport is a AAA simulation racing game that is coming to Nintendo Switch in 2019, and it originally released back in 2014, but not for systems like PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. No, for 360, PlayStation 3, and Windows. It got a Metacritic score of 75 on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 and a 78 on PC. But what's interesting is they did port the game over to iOS, where it has a 90 Metacritic rating. Now, it actually runs really, really well on iOS. I've played it on iOS. So I think it's just the idea of it's like the perfect home console game ported to iOS and just runs beautifully and looks great. And now it's coming to Nintendo Switch. It is the only AAA simulation racing game. I want to be careful there because there might be an indie one out there. And I honestly think that this is good news for people who like simulation racers on Switch. This seems to be a quality title. It might not be the best of the best. This isn't the Forzas, the GTs of the world, or even like a Need for Speed, which isn't really simulation racing per se. But it's something. And it's something that if you're a racing fan out there looking for a simulation experience on Switch that has that AAA production level, well, at least you'll have something next year. Of course, based on the way pricing has been working with all of these AAA platform late port games, I fully expect it to cost $60 and require an extra download off the cart because that's just what people are doing. That is if it even has a physical version. They didn't announce if it has a physical version. They did say it'll be on the eShop. So maybe it's... I don't feel like it could advertise itself as a AAA game on Switch, but then only release on the eShop. So I assume this will be physical. Whoop. Anyway, folks, that's going to do it for Prime News today. Be sure to enter our Nintendo Switch bundle giveaway down in the description through that gleam.io link. Like this video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it. I am Nathaniel Rufflejans from Nintendo Prime, and hey, you just checked out Prime News.